So picture this. It's late 2025, and the US government just stops. For weeks, a massive political crisis unfolded, and the consequences rippled out everywhere, from small towns to the entire world. This was, believe it or not, the longest government shutdown in American history, and we're going to break down exactly how it happened and what it really cost. That's the number. 43 days. From the start of October to mid-November 2025, huge chunks of the federal government were just dark. I mean, think about that for a second. That's more than 6 weeks. A new and pretty unwelcome record. So let's get on the same page. What even is a government shutdown? Well, officially, it's what happens when Congress can't agree on the funding bills needed to keep the lights on. See, there's this law called the Anti-Deficiency Act, and basically it says federal agencies can't spend money they haven't been given. So when the money stops, all non-essential work has to stop too. Okay, so we've seen shutdowns happen before, right? They're not totally new. But what made this one so different? It wasn't just how long it lasted, it was the strategy behind it, the incredible cost, and the huge fundamental questions it raised about how Washington even works anymore. To really get a handle on this, we've got to rewind a bit. Let's kick things off with Section 1, why Washington closed in the first place. At the end of the day, this whole thing boiled down to a massive divide. On one side, you've got the House, sticking with the president's budget and really pushing for lower spending. But on the other side, the Senate had already passed its own bills, with support from both parties, that had way higher numbers. We're talking a full $21 billion more for some key departments. And then, the other huge sticking point, healthcare. The Senate was demanding a vote on extending ACS subsidies. The House? A flat no. Neither side was blinking. Total gridlock. But here's what really changed the game this time. The administration's approach. This wasn't just treated like some temporary hiccup. No. The White House actually framed it as an opportunity for permanent restructuring. They started issuing what are called reduction in force notices. We're talking layoffs, for real. And they even went so far as to challenge the law that guarantees people get back pay after a shutdown. This was a signal that the old rules just didn't apply anymore. Now, a standoff like this doesn't just happen in a Washington, D.C. bubble. No way. It had real, tangible costs for the entire country. And that brings us right to Section 2, the shutdown's high price. $14 billion. That's the top-end estimate from the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office for how much economic output was just permanently lost. And you might be asking, where did that money go? Well, the crazy thing is, it didn't go anywhere. It just vanished. Poof. Wiped from the economy for good. And to put that into perspective, the CBO, they're the official scorekeepers on this stuff, they figured the shutdown would slash fourth-quarter GDP growth by as much as 2%. That's a huge hit to the economy, and it wasn't caused by some market crash or global event. It was caused entirely by political gridlock. But, the economic numbers, they only tell you part of the story. The human cost was just enormous. Just try to imagine it. Almost 1 million federal employees were told to just go home with no paycheck. Another 700,000 had to keep working, but with no idea when they'd get paid. And this had a domino effect on services we all count on. Everything from delays in food benefits for struggling families to just total chaos at airports, where staffing shortages meant massive lines and delayed flights. Okay, so with hundreds of thousands of people not working, you'd think government spending would just nosedive, right? It makes sense. Well, during this shutdown, something really weird happened. An unprecedented experiment, really, and the results were definitely not what you'd expect. Get this. An analysis from the Cato Institute found something that just seems to break your brain. From January to November of 2025, the federal workforce was cut by 9%. That's the biggest peacetime cut ever. So you're thinking, wow, they must have saved a boatload of money. And yet, in that exact same time frame, federal spending went up by $248 billion. How is that even possible? So how on earth does that happen? Well, it turns out the salaries for federal workers, they're just a tiny drop in a very, very big bucket. The real money, the biggest government expenses, are entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicare. These things are basically on policy autopilot. The spending is required by law and it happens automatically, shutdown or no shutdown. So even though cutting nearly 10% of the workforce sounds huge, it only shaves off about $40 billion from a budget that's in the trillions. It's almost a rounding error. Okay, so after 43 days of economic pain and with the public getting more and more frustrated, the pressure just became too much. Both sides were pretty much dragged back to the table. And that leads us to Section 3, an uneasy political truce. Breaking the stalemate was like watching this complicated dance in Congress. First up, Senate Democrats filibuster the House's funding bill, basically blocking it. But then, and this was the key moment, a small group of Democrats actually crossed the aisle to join Republicans, and that broke the filibuster. That one move allowed the Senate to pass a stopgap measure, basically a temporary patch, called a continuing resolution, or CR for short. The House quickly approved it, the president signed it, and just like that, the shutdown was finally over. So what was actually in this deal that ended the crisis? Well, honestly, it was more of a Band-Aid than a cure. It funded most of the government, sure, but only temporarily. It did lock in full-year funding for really important areas like agriculture and veterans affairs, but the biggest parts of the deal were really just promises. A pledge from the White House to rehire everybody and give them back pay, and a commitment from Senate leaders to hold a future vote on the healthcare issue that helped start the whole fight. It was a deal designed to stop the bleeding, but it definitely didn't heal the wound. So the lights were back on in Washington, but the huge disagreements that started this whole mess, they were still there, just simmering under the surface. And that takes us to our final section. What happens next? There's a quote from an analysis by Schiller International University that just nails it. They said, "The 2025 government shutdown is more than a pause in public administration. It's a stress test for American democracy." Think about that. This wasn't just about spreadsheets and budgets. It was a genuine test of whether the basic machinery of American government could even work. And that brings us right back to the million-dollar question. The deal that ended the shutdown, it was just a temporary fix. The next deadline is just around the corner, which means we could be right back here again. So the question we're all left with is, was this just a crazy moment of crisis politics, or have we stumbled into a dangerous new normal for how America is governed?